East Texas, and welcome back to Beast Texas Breakdown. Today I have a very special guest. I'm going to be joined by Jack Stallard, sports editor of the Longview News Journal. I am Serenity Douglas. But Jack, thank you so much for joining me. Ready to chop up some East Texas high school football with you.
Sounds great. Always ready to talk football.
I know, I already know. This is your favorite thing to talk about for sure. But for starters, we got to just dive right into those rankings. You know, starting with 6A, 5A, 4A. Chapel Hill, they had such a tough game last week against White House. Jack, they won 21-19. And I was kind of scared for them a little bit because I'm like, Chapel Hill has been playing really well this season, but they went into halftime 13-0. So, like, what was going on with them? I mean, they're still at the number one ranked team right now, but, like, what do you think was going on with them?
Well, I mean, White House is not a bad football team, and it's
They're
a
not.
big rivalry, and you never know what's going to happen in a rivalry game. Both teams come into those games, fired up, and either everything works great, or everything goes bad because you're so pumped up about the game. You sometimes forget the game plan. You play too hard. You make a penalty here. You do some things that you wouldn't normally do just because you're so fired up about the rivalry. And typically, what happens is the better team settles down and gets things fixed, and that's what Chapel Hill did last week.
And I think one of the biggest, I guess, movement that I saw was Carthage being brought up from number 5 up to number 3. And it's just because, like they beat Liberty Ilo, which isn't like a top ranked team. So like they were expected to win, but they were able to jump the polls. But I guess I must say that they were able to jump the polls because Kilgore also lost. And we're going to be getting into some of those teams that were moving around more specifically. But what would you say just off of this top 8 of these rankings, like was your biggest like surprise?
Well, I guess in the top 8, the biggest surprise to me might be Pine Tree. I felt like they were going to be a really good football team this season. I didn't know how quickly they would be a good football team because I knew they had some offense back. I mean, they brought back their starting quarterback and Matt Cates. They brought back their starting running back and Lamarian Hunter, and they brought back one of the top receivers in the area in Jordan Taylor. So I knew they had a good chance on offense to be good. Defensively was where I was worried. They have Seth MacFarlane at linebacker. This kid's committed to the University of Houston. He's a standout, but they lost so much on the defensive line. I mean, they lost a couple of guys to the college ranks, including Dalen Evans to Texas A&M. I was really concerned about that defensive line, but that might be the strength of the team right now. They are just playing lights out on defense. They held a good Gilmer team to 15 points. They held Dallas Carter last week to 7 points. They're. I think that to me is one of the biggest surprises, just the fact that Pine Tree is playing so well so early. Again, I thought they were going to be a good team, but they've surprised me a little bit jumping out there and playing so well so early in the season.
Yeah, I can agree with that one. But I mean, for the 3A, 2A TAPS rankings, I would say my biggest surprise for them was Timpson losing to Palestine Westwood. I mean, obviously they are a fantastic team too. They've been playing really well this year. They're undefeated, but Timpson dropped in those rankings from 2 all the way down to tied at 6 with Love Lady. What's funny is I had Terry Bussey on the show yesterday, and he was saying, I mean, it's just the defense. Our defense they haven't ever been that bad. And our defense is just bad. Like, they should not have lost that game. And he's, keeping up with them over at A&M. So I really thought that was cool. But, I mean, I think that's the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah, a little bit, but honestly, I mean, Timpson lost Terry Bussey,
Yeah.
and he drove the bus last year for them, and so they were able to win their first couple of games, but Palestine West was not a bad football team. I mean, they're sitting at 3-0. They're ranked. They're a 3A team, so I mean, they're a little bigger than Timpson, and they've got a spectacular quarterback who's been good for a couple of years now. So I honestly wasn't that surprised that Timpson lost that game. They're going to be fine. They're going to get back where they're playing 2A competition. They're going to still be a really good football team and somebody you have to really watch out for the rest of the season.
I think one of the biggest shocks for me for week 3 was Longview. I mean, I knew that it was going to be a dogfight with South Oak Cliff because they won in 2022. They were state champions, you know. But for them to come down to Longview's turf and beat them 45 to 44, 1 point, I think that is something that was like extremely surprising for me, especially because Sock, they haven't even gotten a win this season. So the fact that they got a win against Longview on their home turf by 1 point was just it was a little dramatic. I think that one was the most surprising for me.
Well, I'm always surprised when Longview loses at home because they just, I've been around here for, 27 years now, just in Longview, 39 overall, and I could almost count on one hand the number of times they've lost at home. But the thing about it, South Oak Cliff, yeah, they were 0-2 coming into this game, but their losses were to Duncanville and North
North
Shore,
Shore. Yeah, that's
two of
true.
the best teams in the nation. So, yeah, I think you really couldn't even look at the record on that one. Longview should have won this football game. I think anybody will tell you. I think Coach King will tell you that. The players will tell you that. They had it under control early, jumped out to a 14-0 lead. But South Oak Cliff, again, has that championship pedigree like Longview does. And, if you don't put a team like that away, there's a chance they can come back and get you. And it was just one of those games where, hey, the last team that had a football, it seemed like they were going to win the game. And that's kind of what happened. So a little bit of surprise Longview losing at home, but again, fantastic opponent, and I think Longview got better as a football team playing that caliber of team.
You know what? I can agree with that. I just think that Longview hasn't looked the same this year. I mean, it's kind of tough to say on them too because it's like, well, week one they were playing in a monsoon, but against Lufkin 7-3, like that was just a tough game in general. But I just don't think that they've been looking like themselves. I don't care. Sure, they beat the brakes off of Marshall in week two, but it was just like, how much time did it take for them to get like that? They were going into the second quarter with no points, and I'm like, it's Marshall. Usually, you jump out the gate really, really well from the first quarter, and Longview just hasn't been doing that. I think they've just been trying to find their footing a little bit more. Like even just watching Maverick Rowe, the quarterback in their scrimmage, I think he's really trying to just find his footing. I mean, like you said with Timpson, like they lost to Terry Bussey. Longview, they lost Taylor Tatum, and that is a big loss. So I don't know. I'm interested to see if they're able to bounce back and play like the team that we know that they can.
Yeah, and again, it'll be hard to tell this week just because they're playing another, standout opponent in Ruston, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Coached by, a former coach from around here, Jared Ball. They play a lot like Longview does, just physical, and they'd rather run the ball. I think Longview's going to be fine. Again, Maverick Rowe, the kid, his numbers are really good. If you look at his numbers, he doesn't miss many passes. At one point, I think over a 2 game stretch, he'd hit about 11 or 12 passes in a row. He's going to be fine. That Kelvin Washington is a solid running back. They just need to. I think Longview, like a lot of Longview teams that pass, they need to not beat themselves. They need to watch the
Okay.
penalties, and they just need to get to where they are just they're able to run the ball, and that will open things up for Maverick Rowe in the passing game, and the defense will be fine. Again, last week giving up 45 to South Oak Cliff, that's hard to judge just because SOC is so fast and so big everywhere. Um, Longview's playing a brutal schedule to get ready for district. They move back up to 6A, so you want to be ready for
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So I think the Lobos will be fine. It's taking a little while to get their footing, but they're gonna be okay.
Now moving on to another Longview team, and that's Pine Tree. They're going to be facing off of Hallsville. But you were already talking about the fact that Pine Tree is already a really, really good team this year. What makes them different? Like, what has Coach Bachman been doing that's different?
Well, I think it's buy-in. I think he's been there a couple of years now. They went through a stretch. They had a couple of good seasons, and then they went down a little bit. He's got the kids, total buy-in to this program. He convinced them, hey, we did lose a lot of guys on defense, but we can still play good defense. And he rotates a lot of guys in, and the kids enjoy playing. I think that's the big part. And I bet, I haven't really talked to him about it, but I know coaches and I know how, kids, they move down in classification. And, people, some people automatically said, oh, they should be really good. And some people said, well, they couldn't compete in 5A. Pine Tree just wants to prove that they're a good football team, no matter what level they play. So they're going out these first three games, and they're just playing great football. I mean, they're solid everywhere. They're playing with a little chip on their shoulder. They want to prove some people right and prove some people wrong. So I think that's been the key right now.
I'm excited to see them against Kilgore because I know that they had like a little rivalry going on at some point, and now that they're in the same district, just to see how they're like fare up against the new Kilgore, I guess you
Yeah,
could say. But even though Kilgore has always been pretty good, and so is Pine Tree, I think that's the theme this year for me is that the teams that always make like good runs or are solid teams, they're really showing out this season. And then the ones that are normally showing out aren't doing as well this season. I think it's kind of like an opposite there.
yeah. There's a lot of up and down. I mean, people sometimes forget we're dealing with high school kids. These kids are,
Yeah.
15, 16, 17 years old, and I remember what I was like at that age. I don't even want to talk about it, but
Me either.
you never know where their head is, and so for these coaches to be able to get them all together and play as a team, and again buy into a system. I mean, that takes special coaching, and we've got some good ones around here.
You're absolutely right. Now, speaking of special coaching and kids buying in and ups and downs, let's talk about Chapel Hill and Carthage. They're going to be facing off with each other this Friday. It's Chapel Hill's homecoming game. And I actually got a chance to talk with Coach Rio earlier today, and he said that his team they've been hit with some injuries and they're pretty banged up. And this is just not the week to be banged up, especially with playing Carthage. And then Carthage, I also spoke with Coach Surratt. And, he said Jet Surratt will be playing just like he played last week, but he will probably be more so 100% next week. So I'm just like, this is going to be a pretty tough battle. Do you think it's going to be low scoring or high scoring?
I still think these teams will score a lot of points. Jet Surratt last week, I don't know how bad that thing hurt him. I've seen pictures of that ankle, and I'll be honest with you, I'd be in the hospital right now if my ankle looked like that.
Yeah.
So the fact that kid played last week and played so well just shows how tough he is, and they put up a ton of points. So I think they're going to be okay. Chapel Hill's struggling a little bit, but I think they can. They've got Ricky Stewart, one of the best running backs in the state, one of the best in the nation. And I think he battled some illness last week, but he came through and had a big game. So I think it will be it's going to depend on whose defense can make some plays because these two teams have the potential to score 40 apiece. So this could be a high scoring game unless one of the defenses really steps up and plays their best game of the season so far.
Do you think that it helps that they are hosting Carthage?
Well, yeah, I mean, anytime there's a close game, we were actually discussing it around here yesterday with our picks, that we make for the zone. Anytime there's a close game and there's any, flip a coin type thing, I usually go with the home team. Now
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Carthage in this one just because I don't know. You can't make a living picking against Carthage ever. So,
Yeah.
but I tell you, this is one of those I used to write a column, and I'd put in there game I'd pay to see if I had to pay to see games, and this would definitely be one of those.
Man, I'm actually going to go with Carthage as well. I was just talking about that earlier in my meeting. I think it's just Chapel Hill needs to rebuild. They really need a bye. Unfortunately, their bye week is right. I think Coach said right before playoffs, and I'm just like, man, y'all need it now. Especially after playing 4 hard games. So I think they're just going to be too dinged up, and Carthage just came off of their bye week and a huge win over Liberty Islo. So I just think that, it's going to go with the Carthage Bulldogs. I was going to say the Bulldogs, but they both are the Bulldogs. But it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, it should be a great game. Probably the best game in East Texas this week.
And then finally, Kilgore and Pleasant Grove. Kilgore, they ended up falling to Gilmer. And I didn't know this. I just found this out in one of my meetings, that it could have been because of the 10-second rule. And things were just not executed correctly, so the time was just not on their side, and Kilgore ended up falling to Gilmer. I put my money on Kilgore for that game, so I was pretty surprised about that one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was a little surprised, but again, it's kind of the same with Longview, kind of the same with you. You should never be surprised when Gilmer wins a football game, especially at home. They're that good, and they had a couple losses early, but they're getting better each week. So they're not a team you want to tangle with at home, especially when they're mad, and they were mad after losing 2 straight. Kilgore's still a really, really good football team. They, it's one of the old cliches. They just ran out of time last week. Literally,
Yeah.
they were down, I think, in kind of chip shot field goal range, and they had an injured player and had to run off on the clock, and they just ran out of time. So, uh, yeah, I think that game could have easily gone the other way. Kilgore could have won that ball game. And now they're going to be wanting to turn things around this week against Pleasant Grove. Pleasant Grove's struggling a little bit
They
to score
are.
points.
Like,
They're,
what's
they're they're
up with
struggling to score
that?
points. They lost a lot of guys on offense. They had a kid that really ran that offense for a couple of years. They're still solid on defense. They have one of the best defensive players in the state. Lance Jackson. So they're going to be fine. This is going to be a good game. This is a good physical football game. I like Kilgore to win this one though.
Ooh, yeah. Kilgore versus Pleasant Grove. Where am I going? Where am I going, Jack? Where am I going with this one?
It's going to be a good one.
It is. It is. And you're right. I was surprised to see that loss. Who was it to Paris that they lost to?
Right, and it was like a 7-0 game. So I mean, it shows you that either Paris is really good on defense, which they probably are, but yeah, Pleasant Grove, they're struggling a little bit on offense. They got to find somebody to run that offense the way that they've done the last few years, and that'll come along. They've got so many athletes up there, and Coach Gibson's a great coach. He'll find the pieces. You just, if you're Kilgore, you hope they don't find them this week.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Kilgore for this one as well. I mean, like I said, I feel like Pleasant Grove, they're always just giving like the deeper East Texas teams a run for their money. Always just putting it on them and then going back to Texarkana like everything is just fine and dandy. So it's definitely going to be a tough one. I'm really interested to see how these rankings have been going. I'm kind of obsessing over the rankings a little bit. Maybe ever since, Texas got the #1 ranking, I've kind of been obsessing over the rankings just to see how these teams have just been fluctuating.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. This Beast Texas Fabulous 15 poll. This came about. I think this is year 5 of it. When the Associated Press quit doing the weekly poll, and it all got turned over to the people at Dave Campbell's, and they do a good job. It's just I was worried that East Texas wasn't going to be represented. Just the voters weren't there. So I came up with the idea for this poll, and then George Whitley, my buddy who passed away a couple of years ago, actually 4 years ago this week, he named it the Fab 15, and we got the Tyler guys involved, and you guys have got everybody. We want as many people in East Texas that follow football, media people. We wanted them to vote, so we got a really good crew of people voting on this. So I think it's a great poll, and it's a lot of fun. Something people really look at.
Yeah, I agree. Week after week, I'm just like, ooh, this is tough. I don't want to send in mine. Maybe they could just skip over me because I don't know this week. But East Texas is making it hard for me, and I think that's the point. But just all in all, Jack, thank you so much for joining me for Beast Texas Breakdown. Really interested to see if some of our picks are going to be right this week or how these rankings are just going to fluctuate. But like I said, this has been Beast Texas Breakdown Podcast. See y'all.